So as a parent, what can you do?
You can arm yourself with information. I would say that to young people. The first thing you do, just arm yourself with information. They're all places you can go.
So Frank is a useful place to go as a starting point. That's the government, it's Public Health England site for young people about drugs. It's absolutely jammed with information about all sorts of different substances, risks and effects, legal side of things. There's some videos on there, there's some case studies.
Drink Aware, as we all now know, is funded by the alcohol industry, but they have got some really useful resources for parents. There's also an app that you or your child can put on their phone, and you can kind of track your alcohol use and your units there. Drug science is a good place to go if you're interested in kind of the researchy, sciencey, sort of a more academic side. There's lots of really interesting papers there.
Drugs and Me and The Loop and Vice, they are both harm reduction sites. Harm reduction is a difficult message for parents, but it's an important message, especially as you get older teens, and something that is an important part of your conversations with older teens, hard though it is, because you just want to be saying, don't go near it, it's dangerous. But if your child is somebody who is trying something, is taking something regularly, is maybe in a situation where they might at some point say yes to something, even though they haven't so far, having something in their back pocket that means that they know how that risk can be reduced as much as possible is really important.
So Drugs and Me was started by a couple of students at UCL just 2 or 3 years ago, so quite recently, because there was nothing sensible for older teens, early 20s that might be around stuff and wanted to understand what the risks were better. Vice and The Loop got together last summer and just did a series of videos. So they're just 2-3 minutes long. And they're very, they just look at the risks and effects. Both of those are about individual substances.
Festival Safe is a really useful site that was just launched in summer 2018, and it's got lots and lots of information about festivals for parents. So festivals, there will always be, I imagine, I don't know, maybe in some fantasy future there won't be drugs at music festivals, but there always have been, and there certainly are now. More drugs per head of population at the average music festival than anywhere else on the planet. Festival Safe is a really good place to go for all sorts of information about how to have a great time at a festival and stay safe and get to go home in one piece. So that's a really useful resource and a good place to go. The other side of things that's really useful to have in terms of your resource bank and a place to turn to is all the resources and support that there is online around mental health and coping with depression, anxiety, stress, and all the things that we know young people are struggling with more and more. Young Minds is a great place for young people, and there's some resources on there for parents as well. The Anna Freud Centre put together very recently, working with a group of young people, put together On My Mind, which is a site for young people really looking at things like, what would therapy look like if I got therapy? How would that work? What do I do if I'm worried about my friend? Debunking some myths and some fears and barriers to young people accessing help. That's the main thing, really, just those things that can make young people think, I'm not going to talk to anyone because I'm not really sure where that's going to lead to.
Welldoing.org is a site that kind of, it does a sort of matching thing with therapists, so that including, it's for adults, but including children and young people as well. And NHS Go is a really useful health app. It's designed for young people, and you can access all the NHS Choices information, and they can just put that on their phone.
Our social media, we do our very, very best to keep us as, that's kind of our live news feed, really. And we're posting stuff every day. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram is primarily for young people. Facebook and Twitter more for adults, parents, but young people as well follow us on that. And I do a massive news trawl every day and put anything on there that is remotely relevant or useful in terms of young people and drugs and alcohol.
You should all have a little card that's got some top tips. So take that away and have a look at it. I won't go through all of them, but the few things that I wanted to pick out in addition to those, one is just a really practical thing. You might have done this already and your kids might have done this already, but if they haven't, it's a really easy thing for them to do. It'll take them 2 minutes. It would take me 2 hours and Googling lots of stuff and watching YouTube videos. But it's just to put emergency contact information on your phone so that it can be accessed if their screen locks on. And it just means if anything goes wrong for any reason, you can be there as soon as possible. You don't have to wait for a policeman to knock on the door like we did. And any medical information or any medication or anything, that can just all go on there. It's a really easy thing. Anyone can do that. You can do that, not tonight when you get home because it can be late, but tomorrow. The other thing that you can do is just have an escape plan. At some point, most of us have probably been in a situation where we did something we weren't quite comfortable with doing because we weren't quite sure how to get out of that situation without losing face. And a lot of young people at some point will be there. And this just is a plan you can hatch with your kids. This guy in America, he calls it the X plan because his kids will text him an X. That's the trigger then, that they just want to get out, they just want to go home, they've had enough. And the part of your conversation is what the excuse is going to be, but what he does, he just rings them and then doesn't really say anything, and they can go, that was my dad, something's kicked off, I don't know what's going on, but I've just got to get home now.
But as a parent, you have to promise that you're not going to ask lots of questions, you're not going to ask any questions, you're not going to pass any judgments, because otherwise they might think twice before they trigger this. If they think they're going to get a massive hard time or a big grilling from mum or dad or whoever it is that's going to be picking them up, they might just not trigger it. And basically you've done a really good job of giving them a radar of what is and isn't a safe place to be. And you just want to know that they're safe. Chances are they'll tell you in a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of years. But you've got them home, you've got them safe. And that's the most important thing. 2 good tips for managing peer pressure are in a really useful little video on YouTube. How not to drink dealing with peer pressure. 2 key pieces of advice which you can access on the link on the screen. One is have a reason. So think ahead. You're going to be in situations where you're being pressured maybe to have another drink. God, have another drink. Or just that pressure of feeling things around you. But if you're asked, and you don't want to say yes to something, what can you do? What will your reason be? But you can plan that ahead. This guy has a really good reason, but actually it turns out that we're programmed naturally as human beings just to need a reason. And the reason doesn't have to be very good, but people are likely to let you off the hook as long as you've got some reason somewhere. The other key thing is to say that reason with confidence. You can get out of situations and make sure that you are saying what you want to say and making a decision that is going to keep you safe and be right for you.
This is some really kind of headline harm reduction information. Again, useful to have in your head and possibly also to have as a conversation. And I always kind of talk about it in terms of a friend, and this has come from the Global Drug Survey, and they put that out there for a friend. So you're not saying if you're doing something, this is what to do, but if you're with someone that's doing something, knowing stuff is most important. Just have information. Don't make a decision in ignorance. Sticking together. Go out with your friends. Look out for each other. Stay together. Make your own decisions. But if they're with someone that's taken something, just to check in, because they might look okay, but they might be feeling a bit weird. Not mixing anything is really good advice. Anybody that is taking anything, they're basically testing it on themselves unless they happen to be somewhere where the loop is. So all the harm reduction advice is just don't jump in with a whole bag of powder or a whole pill because you don't know how strong it is and you don't know what else is in there. Little bits, try it, wait. Remember the possible legal consequences. In terms of food and water, that's a little bit variable to do with the substance, but generally if it's going to be alcohol, having something to drink, eat before you go out is a good idea. Stimulants can be very dehydrating, but again, it's particular amounts. MDMA is something that is, there's a risk from drinking too much as well as too little, so that's where going on those harm reduction sites is useful. If you're in a bad place in your head, you're unlikely to have a good experience. It's very likely to make it worse. And then for young people, it's just that thing about not being scared of phoning 999 if something goes wrong. A lot of young people worry about getting themselves in trouble, getting somebody else in trouble, but it's always worth taking that risk. And bottom line, really important, you just can't make that risk zero if anybody takes anything because as you know, those risk factors are complicated.
I'm always really conscious when I'm talking to parents that I am the embodiment of every parent's worst nightmare, and the very last thing that I want to do is to give anybody worse nightmares than they've got already. It's really important to hold on to the fact that although young people, by the time they get older especially, are very often around stuff. There are still kids that aren't particularly around stuff. By the time they get to university, there will almost certainly be stuff around. But also, of the ones that are around stuff, most aren't saying yes. And of those that do say yes, mostly they don't come to harm. Certainly not the sort of harm that Dan came to. And there are so many things that they can do and that you can do to make sure that they don't come to harm.